Who is January Jones? She is not a young, beautiful, talented actress on Mad Men. She is not an older, gorgeous, exotic dancer from the Johnny Carson Show. She is an author, and she wrote Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th Commandment, that reached #1 at Amazon.com. She is a reality TV golf personality with World High Stakes Golf televised on HDNet. She is a humorist and winologist expert. She is your featured host today on January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and listen to Ms. Jones with her eclectic roster of guests as you learn life's lessons. These stories plus sharing equals success. Welcome, and remember, beware, because you are entering the no whining world of January Jones.
This is Sarantos, and you're listening to January Jones.
We accept the love we think we deserve. In my life I've made so many mistakes. It's a song where along the way I lost my faith after all these heartaches. I lost my way. I lost my way. I lost my way.
This is Sarantos. I hope you enjoyed January Jones' latest episode.
Now, let me ask you a question. Can you imagine what it would be like to grow up poor? Can you imagine what it would be like to grow up in the 1940s and 50s in the South? Have you ever wanted to know why you need to write your memoirs? Now, would you like to learn what happens when you go from poor to being a professor? How exciting is that? Tell me, have you ever heard of a book called The Boy on Shady Grove Road? Sounds like an interesting place, doesn't it? Now, would you like to meet someone who has some of the answers that we're looking for today? Now, are you ready to learn how to be successful and how to lead an exciting, productive life? If you can answer yes or maybe to any of these questions, then you are in the right place. And I would like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Today I'll be introducing you to my guest. He is an author, and he will provide us with information, inspiration, and some really great advice about life and living. I'm pleased to announce that this show is now live on Talk4Media and syndicated on 6 networks with over 4.5 million listeners to date. We are archived 24/7 for your listening pleasure. So now it's time for you to sit back and relax as you enter the no wine zone. Pour yourself a glass of wine, get some cheese and crackers, and enjoy our show. Now let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. He has published his memoirs, The Boy on Shady Grove Road, a collection of 100 stories from his early years in the conservative, segregated South of the 1940s and 50s. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show today, Clyde McCulley. Hi, Clyde. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing just great. How are you today?
I'm wonderful.
I'm glad to be on your show.
It's wonderful to have you. Share with our audience where you live now.
Well, I live now in Portland, Maine. My wife and I winter here, and we spend the summers on Grand Manan Island up in New Brunswick, Canada, where we have a summer rental cottages that we operate.
Okay. Now, do you still have family in the South?
I do have relatives as far as nephews and nieces and so forth that still live down there. All of my siblings have passed away now, and I'm the only one left. I'm 75 years old this year, and but I was 8 years behind the rest of them. So the rest of them passed away several years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, because we watched the football game yesterday with Clemson and Alabama.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Football is big down there.
Yeah. Share a little bit about what it was like growing up in the South.
All right.
In the 1940s and 1950s, and share with us what it's like to really, really be poor.
Okay, that may not be too hard to do. I was born in 1941. It was World War II was just starting to rage at that time. I was born a few years before Pearl Harbor, a few months before Pearl Harbor, and we lived in a country setting, out in the sticks, so to speak, from a little town called Benton, not Bentonville, which is where Walmart's headquarters are, but Benton, a small town between Little Rock and Hot Springs. And we were very simple people. My father was 60 years old when I was born. My mother was 40. There was 8 years between me and the other, so obviously I was well planned, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it was kind of miserable in a sense for my folks for me to be born, because now there was another mouth to feed. My father had worked in through the 30s, and so we lost a lot of his money in the 30s, and then he was injured, and so he moved the family to into Congo, Arkansas, actually a little village north of Benton, and then they moved down to this little farm, 5-acre farm, where I was born, in my mama's bed in our house. My daddy walked into town to get the doctor, but it was 3 miles in town, but by the time they got back, all there was left to do was circumcise me. So the doctor didn't have too much he had to do. So,
yeah.
But it was also, I just mentioned this, a very conservative area that we lived in. Not a lot of the good Southern fundamentalist churches, and people that they kind of no dancing and no lewd music and for a long time no movies and all of that type of thing. And I remember that. It wasn't just conservative as far as religion went. They were also very conservative about the sex word, which I don't think anyone could say in those days. I remember that my mother, one time she was talking to a neighbor lady that was pregnant, and she would use the word PG because she didn't want to say the word pregnant. And I said to her that I knew what that meant. Well, she's about died. And I can imagine if my mother was alive today and just during the evening news, and seeing the Viagra commercials on TV with the slinky women laying on the beds and waiting for their husbands to come home, my mother would just die in her tracks.
Oh, yeah.
But can you imagine? And but there was also, we lived in the segregated South at this time. There were, if you go into a restaurant or something, there was a place for the coloreds to sit on one side, the coloreds as we called them, and the other side was for the whites, and there were drinking fountains for the whites and blacks, and above the drinking fountain for the blacks, it would say colored, and above the white drinking fountain, it would say white only. And so the blacks lived on one side of the tracks, literally, and the whites lived on the other side of the tracks.
Now, we're of course, the bathrooms were segregated too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, yes, you'd never, in those days, a white would never consider going into the bathroom with a black person.
Were the schools segregated too, of course?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. In fact, when I was a teenager, when I was 16, I went into Little Rock, another kid myself, drove my old 47 Mercury convertible, and we drove up to Little Rock, and that was whenever they were going to start integrating Little Rock, and the police wouldn't let us get close to that. But we weren't going to cause any trouble. We were just curious.
How did your parents feel about segregation? Was it something that you just grew up with and accepted?
Well, yes, it was. Excuse me. One day I asked my father about this. I said, Daddy, I said, there's a couple of black or colored men. We didn't say black in those days. Colored men that you like. One in town the maintenance cleaner man at the Ford garage, and another man that you like that's colored. And I said, why do you not like the rest of them? He said, I don't know that I've ever thought about it. He said, we were just all raised this way. He said, we were just raised, he was raised in Tennessee, and he said, we were just raised this way, and that's the way it was. And I think he was being totally honest. I don't think that he was really prejudiced toward the people in a sense, but they were prejudiced and too ignorant in a sense to know it, I think. I don't mean stupid. I just mean they were ignoring the fact that these people existed and they were, had the same rights that the white people did. But it was hard for them to accept this.
Oh, yeah. I remember I went to fly for Eastern Airlines in 1963, and I was raised in Michigan in the north completely. Oh, yeah. And I went to a all-girls Catholic school, which was, we had a white, black, and Asian. We had every mix you could have. And in those years, that was pretty amazing.
That's right.
I went down on one of my trips into the South, and I ran into the water fountain and bathroom segregation, and it just totally rocked my world. It shocked me. It was, for me, it was just unbelievable that had happened. Now, what happened to your family when things started to, when Martin Luther King came and they had the marches and things like that? Did your family, what was their reaction? Well,
I don't remember my dad saying very much about my mother either, except that he told me, he said, don't you ever, be caught at night across the tracks or anything like that. He said, I'm afraid it would be dangerous for you over there. Well, I never went over there anyway. It wasn't any reason for him to tell me that. But it was, they were concerned and the people were concerned and it was kind of like, what is all this fuss about? Of course, Kennedy came in and tried to do some things. Then Johnson, of course, came along and did a lot more for the to making, But when like where I was raised in a little 4-room house with no running water. We had an outhouse. We called it 4 rooms and a path, not a bath, a path. And we had no running water unless you ran to the well to get it. And I ran to the well many, many times. And no electricity until I was 6 years old. And my dad couldn't work because he had been injured. And my 2 brothers felt they needed to go off to war. One for loyalty to the country, because this was a war that was, worldwide. Literally, it was world war. Sure. And one of them was 19 and the other was 17. But they felt also they needed to go to the war so they could send a little bit of money back home to help feed the family. And that's just what they did. And my mom stayed home until I started first grade, and then she went to work cleaning houses in town for $15 a week, which is $3 a day, because she was there all day long cleaning, and that's when I started realizing too that we were different.
Oh yeah, sure. And you were 6 years old at that time.
Yeah. Well, when I was in second grade, one time my mother told me, she said, come over to the doctor's house where she was cleaning house after school. She had a surprise for me. So I went over and she took me into the bathroom, and there was this big, huge white porcelain tub, bathtub. And she had it half full of warm water. And she told me she wanted me to take a bath in it. Well, I had never taken a bath in a real bathtub before. I'd only taken a bath in a galvanized tub. And so to me, that was really kind of the symbol to me that we were poor. And I went home and I said to my daddy, I said, we're poor. And he just kind of glared at me and he said, we're not poor. We're just a little short on money. My dad always had always to him, the glass was half full, never half empty. And that's what he said. But I also realized that we were poor whenever I'd go to public school and they would say to us, okay, this is the first day of school. We're all going to tell where we went on vacation this summer. Well, we never took a and so, these other kids tell about going to Los Angeles or New York, or so when I tell about going to Little Rock or Hot Springs, for a day. Yeah. And then after Christmas, they'd say, we're all going to tell what we got for Christmas. And here again, I had to say, we didn't have a chimney for Santa to come down. And so I had to.
He missed your house. It's interesting when you talk about not having a bathtub. When I grew up, my family did not have a bathtub, and we used to go once a week to my grandmother's house on Saturday, and we were able to use her